Efed podcast, the podcast exploring our fantasy wrestling hobby, where the wrestling is written, but the characters are real. I'm your host, Mikey Unlikely, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here on the Atomic Dropcast Network. All right, guys, it's episode 39, and we've got a big show for you today. I'm very excited to have you all here listening. I really appreciate you taking the time and putting us in your schedule, whether you're on the road, sitting at home, working out, working, whatever you're doing. Guys, today on the show, we've got Max, the handler behind the infamous Max Kael over at High Octane Wrestling. We've got the question of the week and much, much more. If you want to interact with the show, you guys can find us over on Twitter at the Efed Podcast. Of course, if you want to jump into our own little Efed community chat room, you can do so with our Discord link. That Discord link is right there in the Twitter profile. Click on that. That'll get you shot right there into the Discord where you can discuss e-wrestling with everybody from CAW to RP to Angle to Hybrid to everywhere in between. And if you want to help support the show, of course, the Efed Podcast is a totally free podcast. Comes out every Tuesday. But if you want to catch it on Sunday evening, maybe even on Monday morning, slide on over to patreon.com/Efed Podcast. That's where you can find our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. You can get early episodes and more benefits. Check it out over there at patreon.com/Efed Podcast. Another great group of people over there helping support the show each and every month. Really appreciate everyone over there. Guys, EWTs is taking off. It's doing great. We've got a lot of new designs coming out here soon. Everything's been catching up as far as shipping times, and we're seeing that the opening weekend orders are finally hitting people's doorsteps. Love to see it. Love the reviews that have been pouring in. People are very happy with the product. They're great quality t-shirt. They're fun designs. And it seems like everybody so far is having a great time with it. Check it out over at EWTees.com or EFedTees.com. We can help you out with a custom design for your character. We can get you a funny t-shirt with a slogan, whatever your character says. And we can do Fed shirts, stable shirts, tag team stuff. It's really unlimited. It's anything that's Efed related. Hit us up over at eWrestlingTees on Twitter, or you can check out EFedTees.com and hit the contact form. All right, guys, before we get into the show, let's hear a word from our great sponsors who help support us each and every week.
Occupy Pro Wrestling, putting the smart back into smart mark since 2012 as we grapple with design and media services for wrestlers, promotions, and podcasters. We strive to enjoy pro wrestling in our community and podcast, centered around interviews with wrestlers and fans alike. If you like what you see and hear, check out the central hub for everything we're doing and the latest from our site partners over at OccupyProWrestling.com.
All right, guys, the Efed Podcast is very happy to announce its brand new partnership over on Facebook with the Social Media Wrestling Association. The Social Media Wrestling Association, along with its 16,000 member strong influence page known as Generational Wrestling Society, has proven to be the true revolutionary Efed company of Facebook. The SWA welcomes written, video, and audio promos for its talent, as well as results provided in live 2K audio commentary and written results. The SWA is more than just an Efed. With GWS, all areas of the wrestling community are covered. From belt collectors, wrestling news, trivia, and podcasts, and Efeds. Check them out on Facebook at Social Media Wrestling Association and Generational Wrestling Society. You can give a search for both. Once you join both, you'll be glad to become associated with the society. And we're going to be posting our show on Facebook exclusively on the SWA and GWS sites. And we're very happy to have announced this partnership with the SWA, and you can hear about it here every week. So guys, go check them out. Social Media Wrestling Association on Facebook.
Defiance, an Angle Fed boasting 8 years of continuous fantasy wrestling. Defiance offers opportunities for original characters, micros, a standalone website utilizing Backstage 3 script, and a forum hosted on the long-running fwrestling.com, as well as a roster full of some of the most experienced writers in the game. Come see for yourself at defiancewrestling.com. That's defiancewrestling.com.
Hey guys, are you digging this podcast? Well, we really appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you check out my other podcast. The Atomic Dropcast is a look back at the wrestling of yesteryear through adult eyes. We watch the wrestling that we watched as kids, as adults, with a couple of beers in our hands. It's a great time. Check it out over at atomicdropcast.com. You can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
OCW Efed is a hybrid pro wrestling Efed that combines elements of role play and competitive play using the WWE 2K franchise. Whether you're on PlayStation or Xbox, OCW Efed is a creative outlet for gamers and pro wrestling fans alike. With over 16 years experience producing weekly content and live Twitch events, OCW Efed has a thriving community with handlers from all over the world. If this sounds like your cup of tea, come check us out at OCWFed.com, OCW Fed TV on YouTube, and OCW Fed on Twitch. It's like D&D for wrestling nerds.
Hey everybody, it's Mikey. No, we're not back to the show just yet. First, I want to tell you about my Patreon. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh no, am I going to have to pay for the podcast? No. The answer is emphatically no. The show has been and forever will be free. No, Brunk, you will not have to pay for the podcast. However, we have been asked by a handful of people how they can help support the show. And we've also been asked, mostly by Fuzz, why we didn't have a Patreon yet. And I quote, "You stupid I can't believe you don't have a Patreon. I will hurt you if you don't take my money now." End quote. That was Fuzz. He's a scary dude. So with that in mind, you can find us at patreon.com/efedpodcast. Contributions start as low as $3 a month. Thank you very much for your consideration. Please get Fuzz off our backs. The Efed question of the week is brought to you by the EWC. The Extreme Wrestling Corporation is the game's longest-running roleplay Efed, having been established in 1997. With over 100 active role players across 4 unique brands, the EWC offers opt-in booking on all of its bi-weekly shows. It's home to Stranglemania and the 4-day wrestling festival known as WrestleFest. The EWC is built on its welcoming community with zero bias and no drama. All styles are welcome. Come check out the EWC today at EWC4life.com. That's EWC, the number 4, life.com. And this week's Efed podcast question of the week: what is your character's biggest what if of their career? Over on Twitter, we got answers from @PRS_too pretty4you. That's Pretty Ricky Stanton. What if Pretty Ricky Stanton was a babyface instead of a heel? Interesting perspective. @MainstreamIOW. What if I hadn't forgot about the 8-hour window between RP postings back in early 2013 and UWL Online? Would I have won the World Championship? If I had, then I probably wouldn't have had my awesome run in the Coronation Cup and won Wrestler of the Year. We'll never know. @TheIrwin109. What if I made an in-ring comeback? I'm no Taz, but I think I'll stick to putting people over from the booth. Nice. @RealAJAdams. What if I became a Grand Slam winner in any Efed? Well, then you'd be the man. @ElPero Ward. What if Greg Ward had found a place like @_CWO_wrestling earlier in his career? Think of how many world championships he would have won at this time now. @Atara Themis. What if? Lots of what ifs. But what if Atara had faced the engineer a year in instead of a few months in? Oh, interesting. @X-Rated Amy. What if Amy had longer than a 2-week reign as UTA Prodigy Champion? @CoreyBowen_EWC. What if I had not been so immature 10 years ago? Would I be a multi-time champion, or would I still only have 2 short hardcore titles to my name? Interesting concept. We're going to move on over to the Discord side of things, where we got quite a few people answering the question of the week. @Judge Megan. What if I didn't have to leave in 2016 due to reasons and take my sabbatical from e-fedding? Would MVC finally reach the point of the mountain? Would 5BW be started in 16 and not 2019? Would have been better than I am now? So many what ifs. @The EFed Podcast. Oh, that's me. What if Mikey didn't turn heel in 2015? What if I stayed babyface and never shook hands to form Dynasty? Would I be where I am today? Can I still write a face today? I don't know. At MDG Wrestling Game, what if my computer didn't crash during the CSWA World Title Tournament? Would Deacon have won? Would that Eddie Love feud have been more memorable? At Billy What's His Name, Vivica J. Valentine would be what if she didn't turn on Andy Murray in GCW. Matt LaCroix is what if he didn't become an alcoholic and ruin his life and career. Elise Aries doesn't have regrets ever. At Rivs, what if I actually made the flip after Perfection's first loss in Utah to make him Imperfection and go totally Rich Raven? Terrible idea, by the way. Good move for Will, slapping it out of my head. At Jason Reeves, what if Stalker's World wasn't Stalker's World? Ooh. At That Masked Guy, what if I hadn't been forced to take a break in 2016? Tiger Mask Red was about to wrestle for one world title and was heading for the semifinals of a tournament to crown another world champion. Could I have possibly won both? At Seth is Burns, for Sonny Silver, he sometimes has the itch to compete again and wonders if he could somehow make a return. I know a lot of people who would love to see that, Seth. At Juice10, what if Eric Dane didn't have the reputation of walking away when it counts? What if Dane wouldn't have left Defiance? Ooh, I like that one. At Jakey, what if Zeb Martin was stuck in Stalker's World? At Alex Smiley, what if Legion didn't flip-flop on his gimmick on a monthly basis in his first year? What if Kenny Freeman could actually hold a job with Efed in 2020? What if Aeon Kronos could actually travel through time like he swears he can? Colin, what if bees? But too many. At Spectacular Disaster, what if the awesome storytellers didn't take over N redacted W with their manifestos? Smash, what if Keaton Saint joined TFWF like I was thinking about doing years ago? At Ravage, what if I wasn't a little shit in 2005 and rage quit XUDF/XUW? Would I still be doing this? Would I have still eventually quit and come back? Great perspective, guys. Love the answers to the question of the week. Thank you for participating. Remember, you can participate in the Efed Podcast Question of the Week each and every week on Twitter or in our Discord at the Efed Podcast.
Hey, this is Joe, the handler of Graham Baker and the stalwart former heavyweight champion of Alpha Wrestling and champion across the Fedverse. You are listening to the Efed Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to another edition of the Efed Podcast interview series. This week, I'm joined by Max, the handler of characters such as Purgatory, way back in the day, and now Max Kael, famously Max Kael, over in High Octane Wrestling. Max, thanks for joining us today for the Efed Podcast. Appreciate you taking the time to come on. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
It's been a while since we got you on the list, and we're happy to finally get to you. I've been a fan of the character. First, I found you on Twitter as the North Korean news agency, and I thought it was one of the greatest Twitters I had ever followed in all of Twitter. So that's how I found Max Kael first, and then I eventually meandered over to HOWrestling.com, where I now reside with Stevie as the Hollywood Bruvs, and actually get to play together now. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I do enjoy the Hollywood Bruvs. They are a wonderfully out of touch pair of gentlemen.
Absolutely, they are. So appreciate that. No, but let's talk about Max Kael. I mean, North Korean News Agency. How did you come up with that great Twitter handle and fun tweets? So
I get bored very easy, especially when you run the same character for as long as I have. You have to constantly find ways to make it exciting for you. And one of the games that me and Mike and Colin kind of got into was Twitter one-upsmanship, where we tried to find new and interesting ways to one-up each other on Twitter. And I had a couple fun ideas. I mean, I don't know if you were around. No, you would before you, but I had a character named the Herald for a while, which was an 18-year-old
Also followed that on Twitter. Yes, very good. Also a fun character.
yeah, he was my Twitter, and then once we got rid of that character, we pulled up the North Korean news agency, which I was just trying to think of a way, because it's hard, because the character of Max really shouldn't use Twitter. Like, he's not really smart enough to use Twitter, and he's not really like witty enough to use Twitter.
And the things he would put on Twitter would immediately block him.
Yeah. So I'm like, how do you find a creative way to say what you want to say, but spin it so that you can't necessarily be someone can point at you and be like, hey, blah blah blah. So the news agency kind of became a fun creative process to kind of talk shit in such a way that it was difficult to re-engage. Because what do? You yell at a news agency? Like, you just go, if you acknowledge it, you're playing the game and you've already lost, And
if you look at the profile picture, it's an older Korean lady sitting behind a desk.
yes,
and it's like, you're going to be arguing with that? I don't think so.
Yeah. You're arguing with, that's what was kind of the same thing with the Herald. You're going to argue with an 18-year-old kid who knows nothing. Like, you're just going to make yourself look bad doing this.
It's fantastic. And it certainly drew me in as a Twitter character, and even as the Efed podcast, I had to follow you. It was entertaining stuff. And it was hard for me. It was hard for me to like tweets where you're kind of bashing people as a public figure on the Efed podcast, but it was just so funny.
Absolutely.
I had a hard time not doing it.
Oh yeah, no, and honestly, if it got a chuckle out of someone, that's what it's usually there for, and that's kind of why I like the character of Max, because he is an absurd character. So absurd things can happen to him in ways you can't sell for another character, like. And I just love that kind of play, that kind of secondary side play that Twitter offers. And if I've ever engaged you on Twitter, I just want to make it clear that it's supposed to be in good fun, and it's totally supposed to be from that like absurd in character angle. Like, even when the North Korean news was happening, like the tongue in cheek idea was that like Max was still in charge of it. Obviously, it was just
it's fake news. It's obvious.
It's absolutely fake news. It was just absurd. And I love absurdity, as you probably can tell at this point.
Well, good. We're going to get into that and much, much more. But let's start early on. How did you get into professional wrestling? When did you become a fan?
Man, it's really funny. When I lived, because no one in my family likes wrestling. No one's ever liked wrestling. It's never come up in my life. From the age of when I was born to probably like 6 years old, I didn't know professional wrestling was a thing. What happened was, I had a next door neighbor who loved wrestling. And I didn't learn wrestling from watching it. I just knew the toys. He had all the little wrestling toys. And so that's how I learned about wrestlers. And I learned about Sergeant Slaughter through G.I. Joes. Like, I was like, oh, this guy wrestles? This is a real person? Sergeant Slaughter's a real person? I kind of came from it from like the merchandising side and like making my own stories in my head. And then my friend invited me over for the Survivor Series where Undertaker debuted.
Oh, okay.
And
1990, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It was 1990, and it was the first wrestling pay-per-view I had ever seen, and it blew my mind. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I became an Undertaker fan. Like, he was like, that guy, he's like big and scary and creepy, and there's like, that's cool. I like that guy. And after that, I just loved everything about it. And I would always like try to find, the magazines, all the old wrestling magazines they would put out. I had an allowance and I would always buy those. So I started reading about all the old NWA stuff and like all those old old school wrestling dirt sheets. I would just buy them up and read them, and that's kind of how I started learning about all the stories, because those were always presented to you from the story perspective. They'd be like, there are these two guys and they don't like each other. This is why they don't like each other, and here's the article and here's an interview with them. And it was like the whole process leading up to the match. I just never got to see the matches. I just kind of had to imagine how they went until I got older. And then my mother worked in a video store as a part-time job. And so she got free rentals, and after school, I would just have free reign to look at whatever videos I want to, because I would do my homework, and then we had a VHS in the back of the store, and I could just watch what I wanted to. And because it was in a military base, there was lots of wrestling
awesome.
Pay-per-views on tape, and I would just watch them. I would just, as soon as a new one come in, I would watch them. I watched one of the first WCW shows where it was a ring they gave out. They didn't even have a belt to hand out that was new, and like all that stuff. And I was like, oh wow, and Surfer Sting, and I was like, oh, this is a new character. Oh, and that's kind of how I got into it. And then it came stateside, and I still stayed up with as much as I could, but it kind of like washed out in the background as I got a little older, and my parents didn't let me watch Monday Night Raw or Monday Night Raw as it was until I got into middle school, and I hadn't watched wrestling really for a couple of years, and then I got right in at the height of the Monday Night Wars, and that, of course, that made me go online because someone in my school told me about this thing called Efeding, and so that's when I started Efeding. Because the e-fetting basically was all those magazines I used to read. It's just you do all the dirt sheet stuff in all the magazines and stories, and then someone writes the match. So that's I think that's why it was such an easy transition for me, because that's where I first started understanding wrestling, was reading it, not seeing it necessarily.
Interesting. And this was late 90s.
Yeah, late 90s.
Well, that was going to get me into my next question. Well, before we get there, let's say, who were some of your favorite wrestlers growing up overall?
Oh man! Obviously, we just said Undertaker.
Yes, which is awesome. I love that he was one of the first guys that pulled you in, because he was a scary, dark character.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he was so, like, he wasn't just a big dude who like wore tights. Like, I was never a big Hogan guy, for example. I just never really I just was never drawn into him, and I think it was because he was just a good guy. He was just like, yay, it's a good guy. Like, he's like every good guy you've ever met. I loved Ted DiBiase. I loved Bobby the Brain Heenan. I loved Papa Shango, like, captivated me when I was young, because he actually legitimately scared me, because I was a kid. I was like, he has fucking magic.
He's voodoo.
He has voodoo magic. That's not even fair. He just made the Ultimate Warrior vomit everywhere. How is that legal?
He stole the Undertaker's urn. He's going to melt it down.
Yeah. Oh, this is crazy. This man, I had awesome, very fond memories of hating Yokozuna.
Because he crushed Undertaker's face? Or no, that was Mabel? Or with both of them?
No. They both did at one point. Crushed Undertaker's head, because Undertaker can be like murdered and he's fine. I remember loving IRS because he wore suspenders. I didn't know I did not get the joke when I was young.
No, I didn't either. Erwin R. Shyster.
Erwin R. Shyster, he wants you to pay your taxes. I don't understand.
I don't even have to pay taxes.
What a weird name. And I got older, I'm like, IRS, yeah, okay. I'm an idiot.
Womp, womp, womp.
Yeah, exactly. And then on into the late 90s, I was a huge Mick Foley fan, and I actually discovered ECW later. Like, I didn't discover ECW till 1999, 2000, right at the end.
Me too, to be honest, yeah. When I turned it on TNN for the first time, Just Incredible and Lance Storm were on there.
I know. Oh, man. And I actually got those. A friend just gave me a bunch of tapes that he would record ECW pay-per-views, and he just had a whole stack of them. And he was like, here, just watch these. And I was like, this is insane, because I had only watched WCW and WWE stuff, which was, while they had some pretty non-tame matches and storylines for certain, really didn't touch the insanity of ECW at its height.
No, yeah. It was crazy though.
Yeah, and it was a great time, because that was also, I think because of all that going on and just how exciting wrestling was, that's why e-fetting was really, really exploded in those moments, right? And that's why so many of our early characters are based on a lot of those characters, be it The Rock, Stone Cold, Undertaker, Mick Foley, Taz.
Oh, 100%, yeah. I think everybody's first character, they were trying to be The Rock or Austin.
Yeah, well, mine was Undertaker. Mine was literally...
Or The Undertaker, yeah. There was a lot of Dark Reapers and, Creepers and...
I'm a big dude who doesn't sell things.
I chokeslam everybody, and I'm 7'5".
Yeah, exactly. Oh, my goodness.
So that's great. So you mentioned earlier that you had a friend in school who got you into, or he introduced you to e-wrestling. What was your first e-fed like, and what was that experience like, actually diving in, not just reading it, but now trying to play it?
Well, this is where my wrestling fanaticism kind of got crazy. So I was late middle school, I started finding out about Efeds because I would go on Yahoo and look up wrestling stuff, and Efeds popped up. And I never really joined one, but I always like curious about them. And I found out someone in school, just talking amongst my friends about wrestling, was talking about Efeding. So I inquired about it, and it turns out there was a bunch of kids at my school that all Efeded together. They all had there was a Efed, they all ran together, and other people from around the world were in it, but it was mostly made up of like 6 kids from school. And it was a disaster. Like, it was a disaster for Federation. It was as terrible as it sounds, being run by a bunch of high school kids. And like, but that's where I made Purgatory, and like I crafted this character, and I thought it was so cool. And you know, I didn't understand some of the terminology. Like, it just didn't stick for a while until I kind of got into it more, because in a lot of the old wrestling writing, they don't necessarily use terms like heel and face because they want to keep that mystique up. They don't want to use the terminology back in the day for just us pleb fans.
Sure.
So I didn't really understand when they're like, so you a heel or a face? I was just like, I don't know what that means. So I'm going to go with, I'm a guess that's what you attack with. So I'm a heel. I hit with my feet.
I kick people. Yeah.
I kick people. And I was like, I don't know, what is a suplex king? What does that mean? So yeah, it was the kids at school helped kind of guide me into the deeper realms of wrestling and the terminologies and more behind the scenes, because I'd only ever seen it from the fan point of view, from I'm a viewing audience.
They broke kayfabe for you.
It's exactly what they did. They introduced me to this new world behind wrestling, and I was even more fascinated about it. And then understanding like why bookings happen the way they do and the politics behind it, and I was like, oh my god, this is more interesting than the actual stories they're telling sometimes. Especially in the late 90s with the way things were shifting politically in wrestling. And and so that kind of opened my eyes to it, and that same group actually, funny enough, got me into being a backyard wrestler, and I backyard wrestled for pretty much my entire time in high school, and like 2 years after.
We have a very similar path, my friend.
Which is where, funny enough, that's kind of where I developed the Max Kael character to then turn into Efeding, because I used whatever I was doing in my Efeds as my storyline from a backyard character, because it was just easy to keep track of, and it was able to gauge people's reactions to it.
Yep.
And I got to tell you, those early renditions of Max are not a hot take. They are not good. They are definitely the stupidity of a high school kid who has no idea what he's talking about. My goodness.
You still have them?
Somewhere out there exists tapes of me. I don't own them personally, but I do know that someone was keeping them. That I hope they're out there. I hope someone watches them someday. I'm actually really proud of what I did. I was not a good wrestler, but I could take bumps like a champ. So I just did I took just all the worst bumps, just to make it look good. And I was the longest running champion who never threw a single bit of offense, because he had people bail him out constantly. He just got the shit kicked out of him, and then other people bailed him out, and he just got the cover.
I love
it. It was great. Oh, it was great. I had a lot of fun.
The gimmicks we come up with.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he was the minister, but he wasn't scary. He was an idiot, because he was hanging a picture of Jesus above his toilet, slipped and hit his head, and somehow that made him believe the toilet was Jesus. So all my promos happened to me praying to my toilet.
On your knees in front of the toilet, yeah.
In front of my knees in front of the toilet, praying to the porcelain throne.
That's amazing.
Oh, it's not amazing.
It's a bit of character development for sure.
It is a bit of character development where all these things came from. Yes.
Well, very good. So you said you started in wrestling the group with your friends. Where did the Purgatory character go from there, or was that it for Purgatory?
So the way it kind of worked was I was in that Fed, and funny enough, as it happens in E-Feds, people started leaving for whatever reason, and I ended up owning the Federation for some reason. I don't know how it happened, but they're just like, we trust you. Go ahead, and this whole card's all you. So I wrote an entire card. I judged, I did everything, put this card up. And I was like, pretty good with this. And everyone was fairly happy with it. And then I realized that I had just been like no one was putting a new card up, and everyone was looking at me, and they're like, "Oh, you're in charge now." It's like, fuck this. And I just was like, "I'm not in charge. Someone else take over." And it kind of like lingered for a while and disappeared. But one of the people that was in it, I guess I should start with the actual character I had in there, which was Purgatory, which was my Undertaker ripoff.
Yes.
He was a guy named Purgatory and this is only because I saw the title of the film, and I was like, that's a cool place. He was Purgatory from Fear and Loathing, Nevada.
Las Vegas, yeah.
Yeah. And he was Purgatory. He was a big angry man who wore a big black mask, and he wore black leather pants and a black shirt, and he was going to make you all pay for whatever it is you did. And man, he was like 6'10" or 7 foot, and like big gigantic dude, and he was just angry, and you all were going to suffer for it. And that was what my character was there, and he was awful. And I wrote the most atrocious role plays that a stupid kid in high school who thinks dark things are cool is going to write.
Purgatory's in the boiler room.
Yeah. Purgatory is standing in the basement of his house, sharpening knives. Like, ooh, he's so angry, so much angst. His dark hair fluttering in the breeze that exists in his basement for some reason.
The fluorescent lights pour upon his body. Yes.
Yeah, his tattoos glimmer in the light of skulls and flames. Like, just the worst. But I decided that he should have a manager because Undertaker had Paul Bearer, so I needed my own Paul Bearer. So I was like, hey, I'll just use the minister, and the minister will be here, and then he'll cut promos. He can be the voice, quote unquote, for Max Kael or for Purgatory. And then eventually, once that Fed closed and someone drew me out to another Fed, they're like, hey, we have this Fed. I think you'd have a lot of fun. It's different. It's exclusive. So, enjoy it. And it was called EAW. And it was the E stood for Extreme. And I think the A was Attitude Wrestling. But at first I thought it was just a weird wrestling Fed, and I had my weird characters. And then I realized the longer I was there, the characters got like weirder. Like Mystique became a wrestler. And then there was like a cyborg woman based on one of the characters from DBZ in there. And then they had this new kind of match, which was a superpowers match. And now superpowers existed, and apparently you could have superpowers. And I was like, this is getting really weird, but fuck it, I'll play along. Like, and I am at my heart a troll who means well. I just want to have fun and point out the absurdity of certain things, but not in like a mean way, as much as possible. So I made a character. His name was Mechius, and he was a robot, and all he did was he just copied whatever powers someone else had when he fought them. So he was just exactly the same as they were. Except he was just a cold, unfeeling robot who just hated life. And you could challenge people to death matches where you killed their character. So I would challenge people to death matches with Mechius. And unfortunately, I figured out how to write for that group, and they just had a very specific style they liked, and I could write very well for it. So I ended up killing like 2 or 3 characters before they took that stipulation out, because people got really angry. But I stayed there for like a year because it was just stupid. It was stupid and fun, and I got to kill Mystique.
Over the top fun, yeah.
Yeah, it was absurd. It was ridiculous. Like, just and when you're writing them, you're like, Superman punching people through buildings and power bombing them through, battleships. Like, it's the most ridiculous thing you can imagine. But it was fun, and then I eventually started to get like really weird. Like, the role plays stopped being like role plays about wrestlers, and just like, I'm pretty sure I just read a sex scene. I just read a sex scene. That was the whole thing. I'm not into that. I'm not going to get much out of it, so I'm just going to leave now. And I kind of like coasted around for a while. And that's when I found something called Rough Cut. I don't know.
Yeah. The old, like a directory / community / everything, man. It was Rough Cut was like one of the places to be back in the day.
Yeah, I was just randomly looking up Efed stuff, and that popped up. And I quit Efeding for a couple of years because I was starting my career as a cook and I really wanted to focus on that. And I was going to school and working. It was just too much to do it all at the same time. So I took a step back and focused on that. When I wanted to come back, I found Rough Cut and I just posted my resume up on it. And my ongoing story was Max disappeared for a while because he had to go to an asylum and get help. And he was out and he was feeling much better about life. And it was Lee who he used to be on Rough Cut. He found my application and he sent me an invite to see if I wanted to try to join HOW. And I joined HOW, and I think that was in 2005. And I basically have been in HOW since then. There was like a couple times when HOW closed when I joined other feds very briefly, but literally because I was bored and I just wanted to get some writing done. And once I was done, I flaked because I'm a terrible human being.
Sure. Well, that's awesome though that you found HOW that early and you've been there ever since, because most people don't have long runs, let alone one that's 15 years.
Yeah, it's been a lot. It's been a lot.
So talk to us about High Octane at HOWrestling.com or at HO Wrestling on Twitter. Talk to us about High Octane, what you thought of it early on, what it was like, and kind of walk us through, I guess, your career in High Octane. I mean, has it been Max Kael the whole time?
I have always been Max Kael, always this character.
Some iteration of.
Yeah, well, like I was going to say, the great thing about this character is that I can basically recreate it as necessary because I have established that he has different personalities that are very different from each other. That if I want to try a different gimmick, I just, hey, look, Max has been recreated as this. And I've been doing that pretty much since my entire run in HOW. And part of that, okay, I feel is a reaction from, I am also a big tabletop gamer.
Sure. And you just got to roll.
And in tabletop, sometimes you just don't have any control about things that happen to your character. It just happens. You just got to roll with it. So I think having that mindset has helped me in Efeding. So when something very, very serious happens, I can pivot it and use it to do something. When I first joined HOW, the first thing that I really noticed about it was, and Lee's always done this, the website was beautiful. It was well laid out. It was easy to navigate. It was blue. It was a lot of blue when I joined. But it was very easy to navigate. Everything was very well set up. The shows were easily accessible. The boards are very accessible. Lee was very active with people. And I just started enjoying my time there. I had a couple matches against people that were going to no-show, easy squash matches, whatever.
Sure, absolutely. You're not going to put a lot of effort into something you know you're going to win already.
Well, it's also like it's hard. It's the trouble with writing against someone who's going to no-show is that you can't really build much of a story because there's no conflict because you know you're going to win. So there's less you can put into the story to make it really feel like a convincing story. That's not just, I'm going to wank off in the corner because that's all I can do this. I can just, my whole role play can be Max Kael in the corner jerking off. You're not going to show up. That's going to win. Sorry, Lee, you have to read that now. So, it was hard to kind of get my feet in there. But once I started meeting up with people like Jat Star, who may be coming back soon, he saw me, he liked what I was writing, and Lee paired me with him in the Best Alliance. I was basically the new guy who was their attack dog. I was bottom of the rung. I just went out and threw myself at whoever Lee wanted me to, and then whoever Jat was. And we started writing together, and we had a lot of fun because Jat is the Max Kael nicknaming him things, using his name for pun stuff, that's all Jat Star. He got that from Jat because that's what Jat was famous for. He renamed everything after himself. Everything was a Jat Star pun. And Max was like basically worshiping him. He was a sycophant. And that was Max's first year, was just being this stooge for Jat Star. Just all their promos were just Max praising him and being like a sniveling worm. And Jat being incredibly abusive towards Max. Then HOW went away for a while. And when it came back, I was running with the story that Max became homeless after HOW closed because he was terrible with his money. He had mental issues, and he just had no idea how to take care of himself. All he knew was wrestling. So he became this homeless bum who blamed Lee for all of his problems until Lee brought him back and coddled him. And then Max was basically Lee's primary enforcer for about 2 or 3 years. from probably 2008 to about 2010, right around when Mike showed up. And Mike was really the dynamic shift, because Mike becoming Mike Best replaced Max as Lee's like primary go-to guy. And that allowed me to pivot and make a whole new story. And that's also like major losses that I would take. I would always use those as an opportunity to do something to change Max, come back with a different gimmick, come back with a different idea. Just like in wrestling, when a guy would get injured, he had to come back with something new and different. And it was always like Undertaker was always my guiding light in that, because he was the one who had to do that all the time. He always, when he would come back, he always came back as a different version of Undertaker. I didn't like all of them, but that's what he did, and that's how he kept himself current. And that's what I've always tried to apply with Max. Like, if Max, for example, the Minister switch, I was setting it up, but it was always at the pitfall of when things bottom out for Max, that's when Minister gets triggered. And if you follow the way that I write, you'll notice that after every major pay-per-view, I usually do a major gimmick change of some sort, or a major shift in the direction of the character to keep it current, and then also because I have to keep it interesting for me, or I'm just going to go crazy. Again, writing for the same character 15 years, you just kind of like, you know what? I just remembered something. I did handle a different character recently for about 3 months. I handled Max Kael Jr., a giant, thick Japanese man that Max Kael picked to be his stand-in, because he was on a cruise for the closing of HOW. He couldn't be bothered to wrestle, so Max Kael Jr. replaced him on all bookings, earning him a number one contender shot against MGF for the LSD title. Like, yeah, it was fun, but that's what I had to do. I had to play something different.
That's great, though.
For a couple of months, because I was just tired of Max. I was just tired of playing Max. Exactly, and that's absolutely. And I look to a lot of different wrestling promotions and stories to get my ideas, because if it worked there, then it'll work in Efeds. And in HOW, I have had enough time to build these stories and these background characters, and Lee's very familiar with them, and that's like my unfair advantage. It's my blessing and my curse. It's why I'm really good in HOW. It's why I'm dog shit outside of HOW. I recognize it. I am dog shit out of HOW because I lose all of my weapons. My weapons are my stories, and in a new place, I don't have any of those stories. I have to start all over anew. And Max is kind of a shitty character if you don't have any background.
Why is this guy picking on everybody, trying to stab everybody?
Yeah, he's just a mean idiot. Like, ooh, Mr. Cool, Mr. Shady over here being all broody. But I do like to believe that most of the changes that have happened to Max in the last couple of years have been an attempt to sell for somebody else, or a reaction to something that's happened. Not like I'm going to do this because this sounds really like I just don't want to deal with this, so I'm going to just make this story for no reason and brush it off to the side. Like I like to think that all the things that have happened to him have been a positive effect on had a positive effect on the Federation or the characters involved.
Here in the last year, or even the last 6 months since I've been around, you've basically changed the character 3 times, from the North Kael character to Max Kael, back to the Minister. And so 3 iterations in the last, I don't know, maybe 6 to 7 months. Not only is that hard to pull off, but every time you've done it, it's been a key point of a storyline that it makes sense. So that's been interesting. Switching right before the LBI, and then switching again here most recently at the last pay-per-view. Or I'm sorry, on Refueled.
When I try to give people advice, especially for writing for HOW, I try to structure the way that I write like a TV show, and seasons are pay-per-view to pay-per-view. So pay-per-view is your season finale, and everything before that is your season. And that's kind of why I go through those changes, because if it was a show that we're watching, then the character should change, and those changes should be big enough that you're like, oh wow, that was a big thing that happened, and it really affected that character. Especially since, by my judgment, Efed wrestling time is like half wrestling time. So instead of the 6 months of a wrestling year, it's 3 months of a wrestling year. For me, especially since we're writing so much and there's so much story happening, there has to be a payoff somewhere in there. And that's why, for me, those little chunks, they're nice, meaty chunks, because you spent the entire period leading up to the pay-per-view setting your story up, and then your big payoff happens to the pay-per-view, and that's how you get those big points in HOWs to have hit those categories hard. And if everything leading up to that series of role plays has been getting you ready for all the important moments that happen in that role play, that get your match relevance out there, that get your creativity out there, that get your character development up there, and then your readability, because it's just easy, you're flowing with it and you understand where you're going. That's just how I like to do it, because I'm a storyteller at heart, which is my imbalance in HOW was for a long time. A lot of guys in HOW, their problem is they have a hard time taking the wrestling and then pushing the story into it. My problem was I was all about the story, and I was like, and Max Kael's a wrestler too, I guess.
All this great storyline, and oh, by the way, I have to get in between the ropes on Sunday.
Yeah, that guy. And that was Lee used to get so angry because I would lose matches constantly. There was a time period, I think between 2012 and 2014, where I was losing probably 3 out of 5 matches, easy, against like all kinds of people. Yeah, it's because I was writing my damn stories. I was like, I'm writing my stories. Fuck anyone, I'm writing my fucking stories. And now I've learned Mike has tempered me into the art of adding my wrestling into my storytelling, because he has mastered it all. I'm going to look forward to facing Mike, but I do not think I can beat Mike, because he's just way better at what I like to do. But I will enjoy writing against him, and we will. Hopefully, everyone will enjoy the segments we put out over the next couple of weeks.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for what you guys do at the payoff, the big match. I think it's going to be absolutely brutal. 2 characters who have done it all and really done some nasty shit to other people. So I think it's going to get. I hope it gets real nasty at the pay-per-view too.
Well, I mean, Mike has taken. Mike's one of the reasons Max does not have an eye.
Well, let's talk about that. That's where I was going to go next. Is you have a character who is missing one eye. He uses a glass eye, or I guess it's got a light in it, and it's a robotic eye at this point.
Yeah, it's a cybernetic eye through the series of horrible things that have slowly led to the slow mechanization of Max Kael. Yeah, the eyes in question. So Max has actually lost 3 eyes in HOW. He originally had brown eyes.
He started with 2. Yeah.
He started with 2 brown eyes, and he lost 1 eye because he failed a match for Lee, and Lee bottom lined him. He lost his other eye when Greystone, another guy he was a rival with, stabbed his eye out. It was when I was going to take a break, and we're like, let's just take the character out of the equation. And so they just stabbed his eye out. So Max Kael was blind, and I was under the impression I would never come back with him. And then, of course, the bug hit me again like 2 years later, and I was like, I want to write again. So we made the idea. There was another character named Mike Best, who was Lee Best's brother, who Mike's named after.
Okay.
And we killed that character. And for a long time, Mike used to keep Mike Best's head in a jar on his desk, just like preserved. And then we ran a storyline where Max paid someone to steal the head, and they took those eyes and put them in Max's head. And that Mike Best was gay. And because I was younger and dumber, the gimmick was when Max was able to see again, he saw in gay vision, and the world was much different to him.
No doubt. Yeah.
And like for a while, it was bad. It was not a good take. I'm not necessarily proud of the writing at all, but like I think we did it for like 2 weeks, and we're like, this isn't really good. This sounded funnier in our heads. This isn't nearly as funny. So we just shelved that whole thing.
I think we've all been there and done that.
Yeah. but that's why Max had the blue eyes. And then at a Rumble at the Rock, Max and Mike fought each other, and I actually paid money so that Max could be armed with a chainsaw, because we were doing like a charity drive, and if you donated, you got different items, and I donated like $100 to have a chainsaw. So Max was able to terrorize people at Rumble at the Rock with a chainsaw. It ended up coming down to, I was like 5 or 6 people in the match, came down to me and Mike. Max carved his initials into Mike's chest with a chainsaw, and Mike retaliated by slamming a bunch of screws into Max's eye, and he fell out of a window and into the ocean. And I think I was gone for 2 or 3 months, or Max was, and that's how he lost his third eye. And then he just wore an eye patch or a glass eye for a while. Then when we came back for the refueled era, we were trying to think of what Max has been up to, and I decided Max had fled to North Korea to wrestle in North Korea because he's an idiot. And HOW had a pay-per-view in North Korea that Max had won at. And we kind of made the joke that North Koreans love Max Kael. So he fled to North Korea and had to become Kim Jong-un's, basically his wrestling slave. And they used North Korean technology, which was just bolting a piece of metal over his eye socket. So he had the eye socket, or the metal patch, for the first part of the refueled era. And honestly, what happened was Mike updated the poser information, updated the posers. And so we had this new poser of Max Kael, and we could not make the metal eye patch work. It just didn't look right. And so we were like, what if we just gave him like a glass eye? And like, what if we just gave him a cybernetic eye? Let's just give him like a robot eye. Who's going to say anything? It's Max Kael. We'll just give him a robot eye. And then I'll make a move where he flashes people with it. It's Max Kael. If Undertaker and Kane can summon lightning and fire, Max Kael can shoot light out of his eye. So that's how the eye became a thing, because we couldn't do the metal patch. It ended up being funnier, because that's when we also were like, wait, we should make it blue when it's Max and red when it's Minister, and we'll keep hinting about Minister with his eye. And that was what I kept doing, was every time the eye would turn red, it was a hint that Minister was in charge and not Max. And that was like the slow build towards that. But yeah, and then I did that whole story just because we changed posers. So I made the story of Max Kael flying to China and getting, pumped full of chemicals and stem cells to fix his body and, make his face work enough that he could put a robotic eye in his socket. So, most of my stories come that stupid, like, it's just me being like, oh, I'll just make this a story. How do we get here? Sure, this works. It's wrestling.
We're going to find out how many times you can patch up Max Kael.
Well, yeah, absolutely, right? Well, before he had the rejuvenation liquid pumped into him, he was wrestling with a full brace on his body, like a big mechanical brace he had to move around in because his body couldn't support his own weight. He is a beaten character.
I feel bad for the match writers for those matches.
Yeah. Well, that's why he's cleaned up now. Now he just has the eye, and he's like healthy again. Thank God for drugs in China. So yeah, and then again, I always look at it. My quantifier for when I'm writing for Max Kael is it weirder than the Undertaker? If I haven't crossed that threshold, I'm okay.
If you haven't risen from the dead and gone to heaven, you're in the clear.
If I didn't kill 2 men at WrestleMania and bury AJ Styles, who then somehow survived. I mean, because it's canon now. They have to be dead. They never showed up on TV again. Undertaker straight killed 2 people at WrestleMania, and Rey Mysterio just had his eye stabbed out. Anything's fair game, man. We live in a crazy time.
We do. Everything is turned to Efedding.
Everything is turned to Efedding.
Oh, that's awesome. So talk to us about some of the biggest feuds you had in high octane wrestling with Max Kael.
Oh, man. So the feuds that really big in my HOW career with Max Kael would have been against the first big one would have been probably Shane Reynolds. I had a couple little feuds. Like I had a little feud with Michael Morrissey here, and I had like a little feud with Greystone over here. But it was Shane Reynolds who was my first like buckle down. This is going to take several months of going back and forth. Really great writing feud. And I'm not sure. Are you familiar with Shane Reynolds?
I'm not.
I I never know who's outside of How and who isn't in How, but Shane Reynolds was basically like he was imagine sad emo Jeff Hardy and and Sting fusing together. That's basically what Shane Reynolds was. He was a sad man. He was sad and emo, and he did a lot of high flying moves. And it started because he was in How and he was undefeated, and we were having the High Octane Radio Show, and it was me, Lee, and Shane Reynolds. And at the time, we had payrolls where you could use payrolls to buy special match stipulations. You could buy title matches. You could buy merchandise stuff that would increase your pay, stuff like that with your pay. And he was basically letting people leverage money against him, and he could beat them. So I bet my entire salary, and I had like $105,000. I had just been massing it over a year. And I put it on the line thinking I could take him, and he beat me just by a hair, but he beat me. And I'm a competitive guy. So I was like, oh man, we have to face each other. We have to face each other again. So we ended up making it a feud, and we went back and forth, and I would beat him on a show, and then he'd beat me on the pay-per-view, and then I'd beat him on the show. And it played out so perfectly. It played out exactly like a wrestling feud, where I would always get his goat on the shows, but then come to pay-per-view, he would just rock me. And it led to some great, great moments. There was a time where, like, we were in DC for a pay-per-view we called Capital Punishment, where Shane Reynolds, like, beat Max unconscious, threw him onto a boat, and shoved him down the river. And he ended up being out in the ocean for a month. And
I love how you take everything to the extreme.
Well, you got to, because it's wrestling. Everything's extreme. Everything's over the top. You got to make sure the people in the back stands can see it, right? So Max,
if he's going to the ocean, it's got to be for a month.
It's got to be for a month. It gives me as a writer a month to not do dick. Like, it gives me a full month off. Especially because back in the day, because there used to be no role play limit in HOW. You could role play as much as you wanted, and every role play gave you 0.01. And if you've seen when the scores go up, sometimes that's the difference between a win and a loss. So people would race. I would put up 10 to 15 role plays of about 3,000 words a piece. And we'd only have like a week to do these. So I would just be pounding these role plays out just to stay up and even. So after that, I was spent. So taking a month off was like, yeah, Max is in the ocean for a month. I am going to take a month off, because that was a lot of writing. That was my first big feud, and I think that was the first time that Max became more of a main event character. Because before then, I was more just, I always referred to myself as like the Kane. Everyone was like, "Oh, Max Kael, he's a tough guy, tough cookie to beat," and then everyone would beat me. No.
The glass ceiling type of thing. You're the next guy down.
Yeah, you're always looking up, and that Shane pushed me to become a better writer, because eventually I managed to win that feud. I took years, and that's actually where the character of Sutler comes from in my role plays. Sutler Kael is Shane Reynolds' son. He made the character and then got bored of it and just got rid of it. And I was like, "Can I have your character?" And he was like, "Sure, you can have my character." And that's kind of become what I do. And how, if someone makes something that's interesting and they don't want it anymore, I'll usually be like, "Can I have it?" Because I'll do something with it. So Sutler Kael became a major character in my role plays and an ancillary character. But yeah, I totally stole him from somebody else. I literally kidnapped him from a rival of Max Kael just to get at him, because Max is a spiteful human being who kidnaps a lot of people. You'll find that's a running trend with Max Kael. He kidnaps a lot of people. And it's not usually my idea. Lee's like, "So I want you to kidnap this person. Like, let's make it a story of you kidnap this person." I'm like, all right. I mean, that's in his MO, so sure.
It's very Taken-y.
Yeah.
Without the person coming to find you and beating you up with crap.
Yeah. No, it's usually like, a chair in our hobby, but yeah, it was the escalation of Max out of Shane Reynolds, and then I would say I had a really great feud with John Sector for a while, where John Sector,
very familiar with Paul.
Yeah, well, it was funny because Max and Shane or Sector have had a very awkwardly friendly relationship where they don't really hate each other, but they also don't trust each other because they betrayed each other several times. I've always liked working with Paul, and he's a gas. But he was a very good feud because he's another guy who will push you because he doesn't like losing either. And man, when he wants to put it out, he can put it out. And so he was a great feud. And Mike would be another obvious pick. I've been feuding with Mike on again, off again since he's been in How. He's just so much fun to feud with. He always we write a lot of our role plays together. I don't care about winning or losing against Mike because it's so much fun writing with him and against him because you can just go all out against him because you can set parameters and then both sides will respect them, and it's so much fun. He is so much fun to work with because we both don't mind our characters getting the shit kicked out of him. Because it's not us. I'm not Max Kael. If Max Kael gets his fingers chopped off, well, fuck it. Better him than me. And as a writer, Max Kael is like my therapy doll. When I hate the world, guess who gets shit on? Max Kael gets shit on. When I've had a bad day, man, my role play is probably going to leave Max crying. But it's okay because he's a terrible human being who deserves to lose in life. He doesn't deserve to be a winner. So it works in that paradigm. But working with Mike, Mike Best himself is such a shit character. He's just a piece of shit. He doesn't really have a redeeming quality. He's selfish and evil to the extreme, whereas Max is envious to the extreme. And that's why they work so well together, because Max is always in the shadow of Mike. And even Lee uses that dynamic. Lee always, makes Max feel like he's better. But Mike's blood. Mike's always going to be better than Max, no matter what Max does. But Max always believes if he just tries a little bit harder, he's going to get that approval. That's not as much anymore since the formation of the Empire, but it's still a tool that Lee Best uses against them. And it's still something that can happen. But mostly, it's whatever we feel is the most fun to write. And he is another guy who pushes me, and I like to think that I push him to write better too, and to think outside the box. He's another great guy I like writing with, and I actually last week I wrote with Justin, and I will admit this time last year I was not Justin's biggest fan. I am not a guy who I hope doesn't have a big ego. And so when someone comes off as having a big ego out of character right out the bat, I usually do not have a positive reaction to that, especially as a troll.
Sure.
Because I want you to eat that ego. I want to be the one who makes you eat it. Well, I didn't act on it. I definitely made it my goal, especially at that War Games, to at least do better than Justin, because I just wanted to be like, listen, you're a good writer, but you're not that good a writer right now. And I was a little bit blinded by my competitiveness. Lee put me with him, knowing that I would give him a good shot, because I'll give anyone a shot. Honestly, I want people to be better writers, and I want people to be active in the hobby, because there's so few of us left, and getting new people in is not easy. This is a very strange hobby to try to explain to someone and bring them into it. But I worked with him. He was very open to some ideas, and he was very aware that his attitude before wasn't the best, and I think he did an amazing job this last week, and I would be more than happy to have a feud with him in the future. It's so hard because Max doesn't really have a lot of feuds. He usually, someone comes up to him, they have their match, they move on. There's little feuds, but my role in HW for the longest time has always been just to try to help other writers get better, or give people things to do. I was always the guy that Lee would turn to when he wanted to test a guy to see if they're ready to move up for a world title shot. I was always the guy they faced, because if they could beat me, that was a good shot of their talent. And if they could take a loss from me and be cool about it, it was a good test of the character. Because I'm never going to, if you're going to lose to me, I really do try to make sure you look good if I get to write the match, because Max doesn't need the heat. He's a shit heel. If anything, he should be giving more than he does in the match. And that's why sometimes when match writers write Max as being a little too dominant, I'm like, yeah, he's a very big guy and he's very dangerous, but Max Kael is a coward. So part of him is always going to be a little Weasley coward. He's going to try to get away from things. He doesn't like getting hurt. The Minister's a little different. right now because he's just a different take on the character. But generally speaking, Mac, I like to get guys over. It makes them feel better. And if I get the win, that's the win I get. What happens to Max doesn't really matter. He can win in the worst way possible because he gets the win, and I want the other guy to walk away looking like they did something positive, and Max just weaseled his way out of it, or just was able to go just a little bit further.
You want everybody to walk away happy, regardless whether you win or lose, or whether you learn something about your writing or whatever.
And while this is competitive, I always like wrestling isn't real in the sense that there's not a real competition happening in the ring. The competition in the ring that's happening is who can be more entertaining. That's the real competition in a wrestling ring, in a pro wrestling ring. So when I see matches go up, the wins are only a measure of how good you are as a writer. It's not a measure of how good your wrestler is as a character, as an entertainment vessel. That's like for the Egg Bandits. It's one of the best examples. They don't have to be the best writers in the world who are winning every single match to be likable and to be seen as underdogs and winners and to get over. You don't have to win to do that if you're good about your writing and you're able to create a character that you want to cheer for. And part of that, because not everyone reads role plays, is the matches. That's the matches and the segments are your best ways to try to get your characters over. And as a match writer, it's my responsibility to try to make sure that that's what happens in a match. And especially if I'm with Max, I want to make sure that's what I do. Because, like I said,
and especially with the Egg Bandits, they are handicapped by having Doozer with them.
Oh.
So there is always that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, even a blind nut finds a squirrel. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut. That's what the saying is.
There it is, yeah. I make a point to throw Doozer under the bus as much as possible. It's a lot of fun.
He's a nice guy. He has actually been able to try
he loves it too. I know, lucky bastard. That's another reason I should throw him under the bus even more. So, no, that's great stuff. So you hit the high feuds. You hit Max Kael has been in High Octane for 15 years. It's incredible. The evolution of the character has been going on nonstop the whole time, which I find both, it's refreshing. It's something that I would like to strive for, is to evolve my character more, because I think I've been in the same rut for a couple of years now. And I think it's interesting how you do it, how you go from one extreme to the next. It's not a gradual, it's a big move. So I really enjoyed your writing since we've been handling together the last, close to half a year or so. And from Twitter to the game, it's been a lot of fun following your character.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I said he has been a labor of love for 15 years. It's always weird to hear that. But I'm glad he's had the same time.
Before we switch to Twitter questions, is there anything else you want to cover with Max?
No. If anyone out there has not checked out High Octane Wrestling, come on in, check it out. I am probably not the most talkative person in the world, but I will definitely be very snarky. But it's some good fun. If you have any questions about High Octane Wrestling, hit me up directly too. I am always open to direct questions. And if you have any concerns about HOW, also hit me up. I am an old hand, you could say, in HOW. I don't have any position of authority, but I have been around long enough that I can at least provide guidance on how to approach situations or who to talk to.
A ton of experience with them, absolutely. And not only that, but let's ask you one more question before we get to Twitter and stuff. Let's give you one more opportunity to suck the dick of Lee, so to speak. Over the last 15 years, how has How changed? And what do you like about it today? Well, let's say this. What intrigued you in the beginning, and what today still keeps you in it?
I think I had said it before, one of the things that was striking about HOW when I first went to look at the website was just how nice it was and how professional it was and how nice the graphics were. And you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but when the cover's really fucking nice, you want to look at what's inside the book.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then that got me to look into it. And then I had immediate interactions with handlers, with Jat, man, it's terrible. I can't remember all the names of everyone that was back then. But it was just a good community. Lee was very active. Lee was always, he checked on me, make sure I was doing good. He would give me feedback. And that, if a Fed head is good to me, and this is true of me in the real world too, with any job I have, if a manager treats me well and is appreciative and gives me feedback when I ask for it and makes time for me, that will breed loyalty in me. And I don't bother Lee that often, but he's always been available if I ever needed him. And if I had a serious conversation with him, a serious, honest conversation, I could. I think I am the longest running guy in HOW outside of Kostoff, because HOW has been very good to me. And I met a lot of very good people through it. Back then, it was a lot more free and loose. It was much more Wild West. Like, some shit went down in HOW that could not happen in an Efed anymore. Like some very shady shit happened. But that was the early or mid 2000s. That's just a weird time. Today, I think we didn't have posers, obviously, back in the day. Most of them were made on like No Mercy and stuff like that. There were the rips from Create a Wrestler we were using at the time, or pick bases. And then we slowly started getting posers. And that was another big thing about HW, is we weren't the first to get posers, but we were getting like professionally made posers. We had some of the best posers I had seen and for a long time being made by some of our handlers. And we had programmers that were dedicating their time to making the website from scratch, from making all these graphics from scratch, because they all loved HOW like I did, and everyone just wanted to contribute to it. And that's really what made HOW live so long, is that, Lee is on top kind of guiding things, but the community of HOW and the guys and the talents they bring to the table and what they're willing to do, that's what really made HOW dynamic and kept me here, because I could, it just always pushed itself forward. They used to call it the machine, because HOW would just push forward. It would rumble forward because it has like 5 key people who will always make it push forward and will always cover each other's backs. And, tensions happen. And with these personalities that we have in HOW, obviously egos are going to clash sometimes, but once it settles, it's always been able to pick itself up and move forward. It's always been able to find that common ground again and move forward. And that's what I love about HOW more than anything. And, it's on a, selfish note, it's where I get to write my stupid stories and then go brag about winning on the Twitter to all of my people. It's just a place to have my fun hobby, but it's always growing and changing and evolving, and that's why I love it. That's why I am so in love with HOW, and that's why I like to push people to also change. That's kind of like what HOW kind of represents from a story perspective, is that it's this horrible, monstrous crucible, and when the characters go in, they are a certain way, but in the course of that crucible, you have to change and come out the other side stronger, or you don't change and you stay in the bottom of the crucible and you burn away until there's nothing left. And you want to move on. And that's what I believe the real power of HOW is that it makes writers grow and change their writing. And in doing so, their wrestling characters change and morph and become something new and better. I really like to believe that when people come into HOW and they stay around and they put in the effort, they come out the other side with their character if they allow it to change their character with a better character. I believe that's what happens to John Sector's character. John Sector used to be a bland fucking just wrestling dude, and the crucible of HOW twisted that character to become this outrageous mustache wearing, drug-addled fucking murder you with my submission holds. By the way, I made a stable called Ground Zero on 9/11, but it's not a 9/11 reference. That's not true. I guess Stevens got worse when he got to HOW.
And speaking of Stevens, that's a great segue over to the Twitter questions. We've got at Survive the Sting up first. Is there anyone you haven't faced but would want to? He's got a litany of questions. We'll start with the first one.
I would love to face Andy Murray.
Okay.
I would love to face Justin. Man, I'm like racking my mind right now for it's mostly going to be how guys. I just don't know anyone outside of HOW. I'm a terrible.
Sure.
I'm a bad.
Yeah. Why would you if you've been there for 15 years?
I would like to face Lee.
Oh, there you go.
I would love to have one more showdown with Jat Star, just for old time's sake. And I would love to have one more showdown with Shane Reynolds for old time's sake. He's out there somewhere. I know he is. And I would like to face Norcia because I still need my fucking win back.
Steuven's second question. What has been your favorite How moment?
Oh, my goodness. Well,
these are going to be a lot of tough ones to put you on the spot.
Like, what's your favorite food?
Oh, we'll get there too.
I would say some of my favorite moments were probably be, I think I talked about one, Max Kael going out in the ocean after being destroyed by Shane Reynolds. I would Rumble the Rock where Max Kael lost his eye to Mike Best was another big How moment for me. Those are my two big Max moments. Fucking Chris Kostoff spiking a baby in an end zone is probably be high on that list. I remember reading that and laughing because I just couldn't believe that segment had been written, and it's just stayed with me my entire life. It is just, I don't know if love is a scar, but that's what it is. The Whack-A-Meter is one of my favorite bits that was ever done in HOW. Mario Morocco at one point had one of the other a female wrestler named Bobinette Carey as his wife, but she didn't, like he tricked her into it and she had amnesia. And he had an ongoing anti-women campaign where he would slap women, and then he had a Whack-A-Meter that would tick over every time he did it. And one night he realized he was falling behind, so he had a line of women lined up, and he was just slapping them to try to speed his way through it. It was the like 80s style, like dumb idiot heel. I love that. I'm a sucker for it. Those are the ones right off the top of my head that really stay with me. I'm sure there are others. It's just 15 years is a long time, and I've smoked a lot of weed.
I get it. So what have been the most controversial moments you've seen on How? Basically.
Okay, so the most controversial, oh boy. Okay, there's 3 in my book. One of them I wasn't around to observe. I came in shortly after, and that would be the Jat Star incident, wherein, and this was like 2002, 2003, where one of the wrestlers left and came back as a female wrestler and duped Jat out of character into believing that he was a woman, and then they played it all the way up in character on the card into revealing that the character that Jat Star had become involved with was actually Greystone the entire time, who had a sex change operation to just to fuck with his head, and then they had a match, and that was pretty controversial because Jat basically quit for a while after that and had to be enticed back. That was probably the biggest scandal. The next biggest scandal I can think of, a controversial moment, would have been the what was it? What did we call it in HW? The Chicago 6. It was the mutiny to UTA. Which was a very awkward time for me because I am good friends with Lee and with Mike, and I was like the diplomat in the middle when they weren't talking to each other, who had to like talk to both sides, because because they were all my friends. Everyone that left was a friend of mine, and I refused because Lee went with a just don't acknowledge it policy. I'm the worst. I'm like a quiet rebel deep down inside, and well, so I constantly acknowledged them, which I'm sure Lee did not like. But I was again the middleman, so and Lee's always known to give me my distance because I am loyal, and he knows I'm loyal. But I would, try to be like, hey, you should talk to Lee. Well, I'm like, oh, you should talk to Mike. Like, all right, guys, all right. So that was being in the middle of that. That was a pretty controversial moment in HOW and a bit of a scandal for a while. And then, man, what's that third one? Oh man, Spooky Butter. That's what it's called. So the Spooky Butter incident. The Spooky Butter incident happened when we were doing a horror, or high octane radio for those not familiar. I'm not just calling people whores. One of the handlers got on camera for the horror, and his wife was in the background. Well, it was me, Lee, 2 other people. Can't remember who they were, but they're just chit-chatting, and this guy's wife's hovering around in the background, and eventually he goes to bed, but his wife stays up and just was talking to us. And I fell asleep at my computer, but they kept going at it, and they got her to literally suck on a stick of butter, a stick of butter. And then put cookies on her tits and do all kinds of ridiculous stuff. And I woke up to these pictures, and they were not the most pleasant looking pictures. And I just remember being like, what the fuck happened last night? And then Lee let me know. He's like, we got really drunk and the Spooky Butter, she was right there doing crazy shit. So and that was the Spooky Butter incident hovered around the Fed for a little while. No one could quite make heads or tails of it. It was a strange night. Yeah, those are my big 3. Unfortunately, I usually am the guy writing the shitty controversial stuff that everyone complains about. So those are the things that I have witnessed or been aware of in HOW's history.
So for someone who prides themselves on telling a good wrestling storyline, what has been your favorite storyline?
What do you think the context of that question is? My storyline or just wrestling storylines?
I would think it would be yours.
Oh man. It's hard to say because it's all one big story. I think one of my favorite stories was when Max Kael and Mike were feuding, but teaming together, and Max was training Mike Best by just having him savagely attacked randomly during the day by ninjas or hired thugs. That was a lot of fun writing. And my favorite story because it was Mike was the serious one and I was the goofy one for change, and it was very fun. I had a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of really great lines in it. It was just a very fun story to run with. So that's probably my favorite that I did.
Awesome. Stuvens, thanks for the questions. Up next is at HOF Mike Best. In a universe full of wrestling characters, how in the fuck did you come up with Max Kael, and what has repeatedly pushed you to make him more unique to everything else out there?
I think I actually answered the first part of that. He was Max Kael stems. So the name, I think I didn't cover that. The name comes from my 2 favorite childhood ones that weren't named Vader, obviously. A character named General Kael from the movie Willow, and a robot from a Disney film called The Black Hole named Maximilian. And I basically took those 2 names and just mashed them together to create Max Kael, Maximilian Kael. That was my very easy way to make a unique sounding name. As I think I said earlier, he was a backyard wrestling character / manager that was kind of vaguely based on Paul Bear and Renfield from the old black and white Dracula. If you've ever seen the original one, Bela Lugosi. If you ever go back and look at it, or just look up original Dracula Renfield, you'll look at that picture and be like, oh, look, it's Max Kael. Holy shit. I actually used that character as my first pick base way back in the day because he just looks like a really crazy person you wouldn't want to talk to. And that's basically where Max Kael came from, the fusion of those two characters and then slowly building up on it to create the character that is. Because the wonderful thing about this writing game we do is people are giving you ideas as you're giving them ideas. And a lot of Max Kael's changes, again, come to reactions to what other people are doing or to the stories that are happening in HOW or to major shifts like a title change or, the end of a streak. Any major moment that you would think in wrestling would be a big moment, I use that as my moment to make a change. I do mine more than Extreme, but they didn't start out that way. In the beginning, they were much more subtle. I think as you go longer, especially 15 years, you have to go more extreme because they have to be more. The character has to shift more just to make it obvious that they're shifting. Little shifts don't really help anymore because he's such an aged character. And so that's why you see those extremes right now. And I think that's how I've managed to keep up on it. And I just like writing. I like writing with my friends, and that keeps me wanting to change Max up. There was a time last year when I did want to stop playing Max as I was tired, but then we were able to find a new story for him, and I was able to keep going forward. Though I think at some point I do have to stop playing the character. But yeah, I think that answers the question.
Bruv, I just Googled Renfield from the original Dracula, and that is Max Kael.
Right.
That's crazy. That's spot on. So good stuff. Up next at Scoot Stuvens on Twitter. Can Stuvens join your UR cult, please, Max?
It's all he has to do is lose to me. You're a member now.
Oh, there it is. I knew it was going to sneak in there somehow. I would say I'm a half member. We'll get there. Oh, no, that's good stuff. Yeah, you said last week earlier, and I thought you were going to bleed it in there. But yes, Max Kael recently defeated the Hollywood Bruvs with the help of Eric Dane. Fun stuff. It was a good matchup.
It was. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it as well. All right. Over on the Discord side of things, we've got Judge Megan, 5VW owner. Where did you come up with the unique but scary look for Max Kael? I think you just kind of gave that one away.
Again, if you ever want to see it, just look at
Renfield from the original.
You're going to be like, okay, well, there it is.
That's good stuff. Yeah, I might post a random picture of that here in the Discord or on Twitter when this goes live. All right, Rick, the TEFPOG. Question 1: Is your mom hot?
I wouldn't say so, but who am I to judge?
Rick asks at every show. He's a weird guy. Number 2 is she single?
No, she's married.
Sorry, Rick, you're out of luck. Question 3: When will Max Kael tell the world that he is, in fact, an alien who crash landed on Earth in a small ship sent from a faraway planet that exploded?
You're acting like I haven't. Go back and read the archives.
That's the next big character twist. Yeah.
Write that down real quick.
It's North Mars.
Hey, Max Moon was a character in the 90s, so there's a precedent for this.
It's Mars.
Mars Kael.
Does Max Kael have a secret base in Antarctica?
He can now. I can pencil that in.
There's another gimmick, yes. And lastly, but not leastly, when is Max Kael coming to Rick's place for a bowl of Wheaties?
Wheaties? They still make Wheaties?
WEE.
Oh, the Wheaties. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Max Kael smokes. I smoke, so set a date. But Max Kael, he doesn't really smoke.
I think you just got 3 different gimmicks out of this.
I did. Well,
you got.
Well, see, Max Best, he does smoke weed and drink, but he's not around right now.
You got Max Stone coming soon. Up next is Rivs. What is your favorite match that you've had with Max? And if you could choose one meat that you had to barbecue forever, what would it be?
If I had to only barbecue one thing, it would be beef. It'd be beef. I can do a lot with beef. As for the other one, my favorite match, oh man, I would say probably one of the Rumble of the Rock solitary confinement matches was a lot of fun. Most War Games matches are pretty fun. There's not one match that stands out because each match is its own story and they all have their positives and negatives. I will say that those matches stay with me the longest. I have better memories of them than others. So I guess if memory is an idea of how I want to hold on to something, then it's that and Spooky Butter.
Jakey, how did you come up with the name Sutler Kael? Because it makes me laugh every time.
So Sutler Kael comes from Shane didn't even name his kid. He just had a kid he left up for adoption. He didn't flesh it out. I had just watched V for Vendetta, and the Prime Minister's name is Sutler. So I took his name and just tacked Max's last name on the end of him.
What is more fun to you, actually writing an RP or thinking of a clever play on words for the title?
Oh, see, here's that's hard to say. It would depend on the role play. If I can be super cheeky with the title, I'm way more excited about that. And I will admit there will be times when I'm writing the role play and I'll be like, that's the title. It's got to be that.
Oh, that's how we do it every time. The Bruvs do. We start writing, and when the most ridiculous thing we can think of happens.
Exactly. And I am very much that way. Sometimes I'll write it and I'll be like, oh no, I don't know what this title will be. And so I'll look up like love songs and be like, which one of these would make a good title?
I like it. A little diversity. Thanks, Jakey. Up next is Cool Olympus. One of these egg bandits here. Where is Max Shell?
We're not sure. I mean, he just disappeared. We can probably confirm that 24 Kael is probably dead somewhere, but I haven't heard anything from Max Shell. I'm a little concerned. He is missing. I actually had talked to Mike about getting a missing persons milk carton with Max Shell on it. Thought maybe that would pop the boys.
But you do have the broken egg as the
well, I mean, it is the ghost of Max Shell. It might be his power may be linked to Lindsay Troy, so when Lindsay Troy comes back, maybe it will resummon the essence of Max Kael back to life. Who knows? Or Max Shell back to life. Who knows? I mean, the sky's the limit. Stories.
You could say Max Shell is in purgatory.
Oh, good. Go back to the beginning. Actually, you called me out. This has been a 20-year-long story in the writing.
Gotcha. Yep. Sorry. Spoiler alert. Up next is Colin in the Discord. What's your favorite long-term Max gimmick?
I will admit, I think my favorite time being cheeky and right, it was definitely the North Calrian gimmick. That was a lot of fun. It was just the stupidest fun I've had in a long time. Long-term gimmick, though. It's not my most popular version of Max, but it's the one that does amuse me, and that is Max Best. And Max Best is basically a personality where Max decided that instead of trying to beat Mike, he'd just be Mike, and Max Best is what he thinks Mike is. So he's like a douchey like bro who drinks beers and wears aviator sunglasses and like a polo shirt, and he's just like a.
Well, hold on now.
Yeah. He's Max Best. He only comes out when Max drinks alcohol. That's the only way he's able to be released into the world. So as long as Max doesn't drink alcohol, Max Best is held at bay. But if he drinks, he comes out and he wants to go meet hookers and do cocaine.
Got to. Where does the inspiration typically strike for reinvention?
Like I said earlier, major shifts in stories, major events like a title loss or anything like that usually is anything that I think could spark an interesting change in the character. Like any moment, like it could happen in just a little match. Something, the way the writer writes the match, something happens in it. And I'm like, you know what? That'd be really good little thing that happens. I call Mike up all the time and I'm like, hey, Mike, I just had this idea reading this. What do you think if I switch this story up and just tweak this a little bit? And he's like, man, that's amazing. Let's do this. And maybe if we do this way, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And I like working with people. Mike's just the example, but I'll do it with other people too, where I'll just, if something's fun, I'll just start letting it lead me to where it goes. And being kind of an absurd guy, as I said a couple times, like that's where I usually go. And that's where I'm having my most fun at. And
that leads well into Colin's second question is, can you sense when you want to wrap up one concept, or do you have it mapped out longer term?
I try to keep my stories, as I said, to pay-per-view cycles with maybe one or two overarching plots that are happening in the background, but it's never the primary plot. So after a pay-per-view period, you will notice I will drop something. Something will get dropped and end. Sometimes I'll give it an ending. Sometimes I won't, because as a writer, sometimes it's best to leave things unsaid. That way, if I ever want to bring it back, or I want to use that in a future role play as let's go back to that moment when this change happened so we can reflect on why it happened. That gets you some solid CD you can use whenever you want to. It's just a writing trick I use in HOW. To try to make sure that I'm spreading my stories out instead of just being like, well, here's a story happens here and here's a story that happens here. Because I don't want my writing to become uniform like that. And part of creation is the spontaneity of it. If everything's planned out, and in Efeding, you should never plan out, because if you lose a match here or someone writes something that's counter to what you're writing, you have to come up with a reason why that didn't happen. For me, I can't plan necessarily that strictly. Even with role play,
it's hard to have fun when you're so rigid to a plan.
Exactly, because you're going to be stuck being like, oh, I have to hit this and I have to do this, and then you think yourself, you overthink yourself. You just kind of let it go with the flow, and then it's like a TV show. After 3 months, I want to see some change. I don't want to see the same thing over and over again. So I have to hold myself to that standard too, and that's what I try to do as well. But yeah, my planning usually is just about as long as a pay-per-view, with background plots that I'm doing, maybe 2 pay-per-view periods at most. The Killing HOW was probably one of my longest ones. That ran almost a year, but that almost was like a joke. That got funnier the longer it went, because Max wasn't killing HOW, even though he kept saying he was.
As the roster expands and everything else.
It's like, oh, but it'll be dead next week. You just wait and see. Like
every week, yeah. Lastly, we got at Trash Talk Titan, Mike Best snuck a couple more in here as we started recording. Number 1, aside from your own, what's the most unique gimmick you've ever seen in Efeding?
I got 2 that I can think of. One, Brendan Cross, who handed me one of my favorite. You know what? This reminded me of one of my favorite stories I wrote against Darren Matthews. Brendan Cross was a time traveler. Arguably a time traveler. He's never proven he could travel through time, but he believed that he was a time traveler. And if you believe it, in my world, it's real enough. And so last year, one of my ongoing gimmicks was that Max was like Mega Man. If he beat you, he got to steal part of your gimmick. I still bring it up now and again, but it was much more invasive last year or earlier this year. And I beat Brendan Cross, so I said Max had time travel powers. and like we made a couple jokes about how like the reason why things were terrible, like the reason why like in the real reality, Stevens is a multi-time world champion, but Max messed something up, so now we live in the universe where no one respects Stevens. Like, so I would like jokes like that, like just stupid time travel jokes. But against Darren Matthews or Darren Zion, I decided to write a more interesting. I basically took a gambit. I wanted to try a different kind of writing perspective. What I did was I presented my role plays as a cassette tape that Max had submitted from North Korea because they don't have DVDs over there. And the whole first part of this tape is just Max breaking down. Like, I know everything about you, Darren Zion. I know how you operate. I know everything about your life. I know exactly what you're going to do. I know what you're going to do before you do it. I've been watching you for so long. You don't even realize that I control everything about your life. The only reason you're here is because I made a bet with Mike to say that I could turn you into a respectable wrestler. Well, now I've got to face you. And if I beat you, I've failed. So this is going to suck for you, for both of us. Because I'm going to be a failure and you're going to be a failure if I beat you. And if you beat me, I'm going to be a failure and you're not going to be a failure, and that's going to suck. But don't worry, because it's not going to happen. And I have all the evidence to support my argument on the next side of the tape. And that's where the roleplay ended. And Darren's like, what's on the tape? I'm like, well, we just have to wait for my second roleplay, which I'm probably not going to put up till the very end. So you have to make a decision. Either Darren Zion reacts to this tape, or Darren Zion does not react to this tape. You got to make that decision. And he did. He did his best. But I had the time travel story. And what I did was I went through and read every Darren Zion roleplay from the beginning of the year to that moment. And I picked key moments where bad shit happened to Darren Zion. Then my entire second roleplay was just Max with a camera filming himself ruining every moment in Darren Zion's life in the last 6 months. And yeah, it was fun to write. It was just a fun, absurd little thing to write, and it ended up winning the match. But it was a lot of fun to write, and Darren was a really good sport about it. Those are the kind of things I like writing, where maybe he time traveled, or maybe Max is just a really creepy dude who's literally been following Darren Zion around for 6 months, and now he's just claiming he has time travel.
Amazing. It was this Paragon who had the time travel?
Oh, Brendan Cross was the character's name.
Oh no, I mean when Max Kael had.
Oh, who had that? It was just the North Koreans had it.
Okay.
Because
okay.
Well, and in one of Brendan Cross's role plays, he tried to get into North Korea, and he never got a second role play up. So his role play ends with him just getting beaten by North Korean soldiers. So I just took it and I'm like, Max let them go, and he kept his time travel device.
Nice way to twist things. Secondly, from Mike, what is your favorite career feud and why?
It would have been Shane Reynolds, but and he I guarantee he asked us just to hear his name, but it's Mike Best. He knows that.
He knew he had to get himself over one last time before the podcast was over. Oh, look, they're getting ready to record. Oh, what can I ask? So he says Mike Best.
Who is your favorite person whose last name is Best but starts with an M? The answer to that question is Mr. Lee Betts.
Max Betts.
Oh, Max Betts. There you go. Yeah.
Max
Even
Betts.
better answer.
Yeah.
Man, you're putting my character over better than I am.
Question 3. What has made you stick with HOW for almost 15 years and with so many feds out there?
I think I talked about that earlier. It's just it's a good community of people that I've grown to consider my friends. Lee is my friend. Mike, everyone in the Empire, or not Empire, in the Group of Death is my friend. Most of the roster I would consider a friend or on friendly terms with. I like writing. I like sharing that writing. I like getting people excited about writing. I like writing people's matches and having them happy with them. I just like the whole hobby. It's so unique. I don't think you can really find another hobby like this anywhere else, especially for wrestling, because I have such a deep love of wrestling too. So all the things that I love, writing, being a goofy fucking nerd, and being a person who likes to write and create, all of it comes together for me, and that's why I like to stay in it. And HOW has just always been around. I'm sure if HOW had died, I would have found someplace else, but HOW has just stood the test of time. It's hard to argue with that for me. And as long as it's here and I'm having fun, I'll probably still be here.
And you can check out HOW over at HOWrestling.com. It's a great role play fed with top-notch role players. It's very competitive and a lot of fun. So before I let you go, Max, is there anything else you want to cover? Anybody else you want to put over? Anybody else you want to shout out to?
Just really any shout outs. Continue the good work over at HW, everybody. And it was fun, again, facing you and, oh my God, I can't believe Kendricks.
Stevie?
This week, I hope you enjoyed what me and Justin put up. It's really, really hard for me to role play against you guys because I usually, especially writing for Minister, I have to be angry because he's just such a spiteful person. And I will tell you a secret. I actually had a really terrible promo written originally that I was going to post, and then I read a role play, and I was so wanting to respond to that role play that I just took it out on you guys. So I apologize for that.
No, it's good, and it was a lot of fun role playing against the character of Max Kael and reading what you and Justin put up. And I love writing a heel character that's a shitbag because I love reading jokes about my characters. I love people bashing my character. That's what drives me to write and be funny, is because people are going to attack that part, and it's so much fun for me.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
It's like when you watch wrestling and you see the heel finally get beat up.
Absolutely,
it's so much fun.
Absolutely, and that's usually, and that's the hard part about a role play, Fed, is because the comeuppance almost in some cases has to be controlled by the people playing with an awareness of it that bleeds into the matches, because you have a situation where like you have Max, who's a heel, who might beat a face, but you don't want Max to win fairly because you don't want to reward the heel. Shouldn't be winning these things fairly, and they shouldn't be looking dominant in the process. So I do like to have a little bit of control when I'm running because the unfortunate thing about having a character like Max Kael around for so long is that some people really want to make him look good, which I really appreciate, but is not necessary.
Right. He can hit 5 moves, bite someone.
It's like War Games.
Get out of there
at War Games, what he did was he tased Sesselworth, and he tried to stab Mike in the face for like 5 minutes. And that's fine though, because that's all he has to do. He doesn't need to do anything more than that. And exactly, he can have the shit beat out of him. It's fine. And so if anyone from How is listening to this and you're going to be match writing, it's okay. Don't feel like you have to be precious with Max. You can have the shit beat out of him. Even if he's the Minister, he'll just take it. He's a bad guy. And that's why I also, in my stories, I try to give Max his comeuppance or the Minister his comeuppance on its own. Or if I can work with someone to do it, like to give that give and take. Even better. Which is why I really liked working with Justin. I think we were able to work that give and take with our segments. And I look forward to working with almost anyone in HOW. I say almost anyone in HOW. It insinuates that I have someone that I'm not looking forward to working with.
Anybody but Doozer. So I mean, I think that's pretty much lays the law of the land.
But yeah, shout out to all my HW people. I love you all. You all do a great job. We are trekking a year ago, we didn't think we would be here. We've managed to keep this thing going. I have met a lot of new people through this. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to the Efed podcast because I know and knew nothing about the community outside of HW. This podcast is the only reason I know about people like Chris Ross. Otherwise, I never would have known about this person. So thank you for having this and for giving me a window into the world outside of my little safety hole.
Well, I'm sorry for introducing you to Chris. I hope that you forgive us. No. Glad that we could be a part of that and appreciate the shout out. Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Really I had a great time. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's going to wrap us up for another edition of the Efed podcast. Really want to thank Max for taking the time to come on and talk to us about Max Kael and his super long history in high-octane wrestling. 15 years is a long time to spend in one place. Really enjoyed interviewing him. I want to thank everyone for participating in the Efed podcast question of the week over on Twitter and in the Discord. I want to thank each and every one of our sponsors for helping support the show, as well as each and every one of our patrons who are giving their monthly donations to the show. We really appreciate you. We're doing new stuff and getting new equipment and everything else, thanks to everybody out there who helps support us. We want to also mention, check out EWTs.com if you have not yet, where you can get your custom shirts made for your Efed characters or Feds. And make sure you check out the Patreon over at patreon.com/Efed podcast. Guys, thanks for listening to another edition, episode 39 of the Efed podcast, where the wrestling is written, but the characters are real.
Free on Patreon.